And we are live. Thank you, Josh. All right, everybody, it's May 18th. This is the Avon Grove Charter School working session. We're going to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. So we're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And if you would also recite the mission statement: to inspire passion for lifelong learning, one student at a time. Thank you. Roll call. Who do we have doing roll call?
I'm here. I can do it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
No problem. Joyne Degler.
Here.
Eugene Steger. Stacy Barno. Here. Robert Rainier.
Here.
Colleen Preston.
Here.
Deji Akintoy.
Here.
Brian Ladman.
Here.
Kristen Smith.
Here.
And Michelle McCray.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Kristen, I'm assuming there's no public comment for this evening.
No public comment for the work session.
Okay. All right, moving along, board meeting schedule, which seems to be on our screen.
It is on your screen. I figured you could use this as a guide for what you have going on in the next couple of weeks that I know you wanted to talk about. So
yeah, so we I think this is great for everything. The only thing I'd like to change is, and there's a couple people with vacations, I'd like to change the annual meeting. Does anyone have any commitments? I'd like to switch it to the week after, the 28th, because I know I'm on vacation. I know Michelle's on vacation. Or either the 28th or 29th. That's a Monday or Tuesday. Anybody else have any concerns or conflicts?
I can't do the 28th. I could do the 29th.
Okay. So what I'll do is, let me just go around. I'm just going to ask, and just, you can give me a nod or anything. Rob, with the 29th? Well, Rob, never mind. Never mind, Rob. Stacy, would the 29th work for you?
Yes, it will.
Brian, how about you?
Come back to me. I'm checking calendars now.
Okay, no worries. Michelle? Yep, no worries.
Back to me too. I'm looking right now, please.
No worries. Kristen, I'm jumping you. Deji, how about you?
As far as I know, for the current member, the answer is yes.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Michelle and Brian, when you get around to that, let us know.
They work both for me.
Oh, perfect. Let's do the 29th, Brian.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
All right, perfect. So, Kristen, if we could update, and I can send Susan an email, or that will make that the 29th.
that would be great. Donna, does that work for you? Because I know you have some stuff in there. I can do the 29th. I couldn't do the 28th.
I can do the 29th.
Okay.
Perfect. That works. Excellent. Thank you for being flexible.
You're welcome. I know, and I think Stacy's on this call. I thought I saw her come in too.
She is.
At the 23rd board meeting, last year, you swore in your new board members and you did committee assignments. With that changing, and Donna had mentioned something about the board members that are leaving, which is Rainier and Smith, that they are in the bylaws, they go to the annual, and that's the switch. Is that still the case, or has to be the case if they're moving it to the 29th?
Yes, it's still, they're in place until the annual meeting, I believe.
Because they can't vote. The new people
Right.
can't vote, right?
Correct.
Until sworn
Correct.
in.
So this is the last meeting that they would attend and they would vote, and then the new people step in July.
Right. So they would
Rob
have to
and
be there.
Kristen, we do have to be there on the 29th. Look at Kristen. Yay. Rob, you're good the 29th? Yep. Big thumbs up. Excellent. And then we have another working session board meeting on the 17th or the 20th of July.
Now, that's the other thing I wanted to tell you. So sometimes you guys have July meetings and sometimes you don't. The board has done it different ways in the past. You do have an August 7th retreat from 9 to 1. So I wanted to get some guidance on whether you wanted a July meeting or not. At this point, I'm assuming that things will be changing, not as frequently as they were last year, but if there's a need for a meeting, we can have a special meeting if you decide you don't want to have a July meeting, but something comes up. But that would be up to you, Dwayne, and the board, how you want to do that.
Well, if we're looking at, I think we looked at when I got all the feedback from Susan, it looked like August, I'm pulling up that email right now because I want to say August 7th looked like the better day for the retreat. Here it is. Yeah, I had more board members available on the 7th. Could we skip the August meeting or do we need to have that one?
That one we have to because it's right
That's
before
fine.
school starts. Yeah.
Yeah, then if it's up to the board, I'm okay with skipping a July meeting because we're going to have that retreat on August 7th, but I'll get everyone's feedback. What's everyone else think? I can take a yes or a no.
I
Stacy?
think if we go ahead and make the decision now that unless something comes up, leave it there. If something comes up, then it's blocked out. But I think we would probably be okay unless we get major changes that we need to act upon.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
I think in the past, we've canceled the July meeting and said if a special meeting is needed, then we just went ahead and did that.
Yeah, I like that plan. Perfect.
Okay.
So we'll cancel it unless there's a special meeting needed.
Okay.
And then August 7th, hold that date for, if you're available, I know some of you aren't, hold that date for the retreat and more details will follow.
Now, the 29th meeting, the annual meeting, Dwayne, you had mentioned that you want to be in person.
Yes.
And so what I'm watching school districts do right now is live stream the meetings while you're doing them in person, because parents now are used to being able to participate at their leisure from their home with Zoom. So I'm assuming that's something that the board would like to continue to do, but I want some guidance on if that's the case or not.
We do. And what we were talking about, we did have an executive session. We talked about just briefly about the logistics, and I was going to reach out to you. And since, where'd he go? Josh, maybe we can talk about some logistics for cameras, microphones, how to best set that up, because we've had that challenge. I know Deji brought that up with muting, unmuting, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I did talk to Josh before this meeting, and we do have plenty of webcams, he said, so it wouldn't have to be reliant on Zoom like we were doing in the past. Stacy, I saw that you had something. Is there something we need to know?
So I want to make sure that once the Act 15 provisions are lifted, when the declaration of emergency is terminated, I guess, or if the constitutional amendment passes today, that you still have the ability to conduct even a remote public attendance meeting. I need to confirm that because I think what everybody's doing right now is permitted under Act 15. I'm not sure once the pandemic and the emergency declaration related to it that authorizes the virtual meetings is lifted, if you'll be permitted to do even this hybrid process. You can certainly broadcast it. That's always permitted, right? So you can hold a public meeting and broadcast it, but that public meeting would have to invite the public to attend. They wouldn't have to. They could watch it virtually if they wanted to, but you would have to invite them publicly. So that may be the distinction.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we're
Let us
good?
know. Yeah, I think we're great.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to prepare the board because I know several of the committees started to talk about the upcoming strategic conversation around the new high school replacement, high school modular replacement, or upper school modular replacement. So for several months now, we've been talking to a steering committee, which Heckendorf and Shiles is running. Myself, Donna, Brian, and Ian have been a part of conversation, whether that's by ourselves together or in committee meetings. We've had conversations with Heckendorf and Shiles about the need of the school. There's been program interviews. So strategic committee had a meeting, facilities committee had a meeting, administrative team had interviews, technology, and the teachers have had, and that's designated teachers, have had program interview about what the new building would need when looking at the new modular replacement. So same as before, what Heckendorf and Charles is going to do is they're going to take everybody's feedback, all the meeting information, and they will be showing us some drawings of options of what we can do. So the things that they're looking at are a 2-story modular replacement. So something that's 2 stories that doesn't take up as much room, that are new modulars like we've had in the past with the STEM and the current one in the back. It used to be 5th grade, now it's programming, engineering, and so forth. And the other option would be to build a brick and mortar addition with additional students that would be required, along with a new brick and mortar building with a gym that's attached. They looked years ago, I don't know how many years ago, at least 5, I think. We looked at a gym. It was called the Commons. There was pictures. I think, Kristen, you might have been there. I'm not sure, but there was pictures of the Commons and what that would look like. And that would allow us to at least have a high school that was able to gather in one space. Currently, right now, that's very difficult to do. Our gym is not big enough. The collaboratory is not even big enough to hold, and we're growing in the high school. So there's no space for the kids that way. So that's something that we're looking at. So potential challenges are going to be a new bond exploration, a feasibility study, land development, a construction schedule, and financing. So these are not big or small challenges. They're very big challenges. And it's going to take the board and all of the committees to really come together and do their part to make this work. So I just wanted to kind of prepare you for that. We talked about doing it at the next June work session where we could start it, or do a special meeting where we just talk about this, or talk about it at the annual meeting. So I was going to touch base with Jared to see about how long this meeting would be. And if I think it would extend into too much time between work session or the annual meeting, I'll let you know, but I'm planning on it being at one of those meetings. Okay? Okay. All right, so we want to take some time to talk about the Esthers money. So you have been hearing through these board meetings, we got money, grant money through Esthers or CARES. And we kind of want to make sure that we're very specific about what does that mean, how much are we getting, and what are we spending this money on? And so obviously this is a lot of money, but with COVID, there's a lot of things that we need and a lot of resources. So there's going to be a lot of conversation around what's the best use of that money. And so when Esthers put out information and we talked about what this money was allowed to be used for, things changed drastically. And that always happens, right? They say, here's what it's going to be used for. And then they say, well, we're not really going to be able to use it for this later when they do Esthers 2 or Esthers 3. And it's constantly redefining itself. So currently right now, Esthers 1 was very broad, and it was about a lot of COVID related issues. So cleaning and our dividers and all of those things that came with COVID expectation is what a lot of people were using it for and what they enticed it to be used for. With Esthers 2, there was a lot of the same of what Esthers 1 was, but there was also a lot of conversation around digital learning and connectivity, and then just high quality assessments and evidence-based activities that we could do with kids online. And now Esthers 3, we're awaiting additional guidance. Some of those things that we talked about that are huge for our school are facilities repairs and improving indoor air quality and how we can use the money to do some of the things that we need for the school buildings. So under those specific guidelines, there is allowable usage under Esthers 1, 2, and 3. So the facilities committee had a lot of conversation around what needs to be done at the school and how we can use Esthers money to support that. However, what we're now seeing and what we know is that COVID is causing a lot of learning loss for our kids, and we don't want to use all of the money on facilities when there is things the kids need for their instruction, especially with the gaps that we're going to see because of COVID. So with that in mind, they put out guidance from the state to talk about accelerated learning. And they put them in these buckets. When they talk about accelerating learning, they're talking about academic achievement, making sure our kids can achieve the standards-based learning that they have in each grade level, that we close the gaps for their learning, specifically social emotional well-being, obviously something we've been talking about. Ryan did a presentation at the last board meeting about some of these social emotional goals that we have as a school. And then there's healthy systems and scaffolding supports. And this talks a lot about the data systems that we're using, MTSS, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which tier 1, remember, as board members, we've talked about this, that's the basic instruction that kids get, and tier 2 and 3 being more intensive supports. So with all of these things, we decided to break out these buckets to better understand, to help you understand what we're looking to do. So I'm going to let Jen Weaver talk about the high quality academics. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. So what we tried to do here is using the support from PDE, like Kristen alluded to in the previous slide. They had put out some roadmaps since the start of the pandemic back in the last spring. And they released a new roadmap called the Accelerated Learning System, because like she said, much of the talk and the work has been making sure we had a safe environment for our students to return to school, which is critical and very important. Now the focus is shifting on the learning and making sure that kids are getting everything that they need, knowing the challenges will be more difficult in the coming months and maybe even years, based on what we just went through. So what we want to do here is break down those 4 buckets, like Kristen said, and then show you what we're currently doing. And then the considerations piece is things we're taking obviously into consideration, but things we want to potentially plan for in the coming months and even years. And how we're going to tie it to Esthers funding potentially. So in terms of high quality academics, this focuses a lot on the data and looking at our programming. So some of the things that we can break it down to are assessments. So we've always had a strong MTSS system, and we always look at revamping and improving it. So we'll continue that thought process and mindset as we progress through the rest of this year into next year. In analyzing some of our data, things for us to think about is to continue using multiple data sources to make informed decisions, which means we're not just going to give one assessment to kids and say, okay, based on this assessment, we're going to make these decisions that require intense interventions or not. We need to look at bigger picture. And this also includes not just the academic side, but the social, emotional, and behavioral data that we have to make the most informed decision for our kids. Redesigning our PLCs, our personal learning communities, that's tied to the professional development that teachers participate in, and looking at them to ensure that they're data-driven and not just willy-nilly, and that there's meaningful work and we're using data to inform our practices. In terms of instruction, so we're continuing the work through our curricular framework. We've had our math frameworks worked out. We're wrapping up our ELA framework, so they'll be good to go in the fall. And we'll continue to work on our social studies, science, foreign language, and some of our elective classes in the coming years based on our framework plan. Continue to work on grading and reporting. That was a change that took place earlier on this school year. So we're reevaluating that, looking at it, seeing what worked, what did not work, and if there are any changes, what those could potentially look like. Ensuring fidelity in our instructional strategy. So it's one thing to put programming in place, but we need to make sure it's being implemented the way that it is supposed to be, so that we're making the best use of our time and our students' time. Continuing to roll out common assessments at our math and ELA levels. This really helps to ensure not only that the kids are progressing, but that our instructional practices are meeting the standards in which we're intending them to be. So that data from those common assessments that students take really helps us with that. With bringing in an instructional coach, we're developing a coaching plan to make sure that we have a solid understanding of the role of the instructional coach and what that person's going to do and how they're going to support classroom instruction and the teachers. And again, there's the PLC and the data focus. And then in terms of considerations, things we want to think about that could potentially relate back to Esthers and how funding could support some of these things. So continuous professional development on our assessment platforms. So we're in a decent place in terms of the assessments that we're currently using on the academic. I think, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, on the social, emotional, and behavior side. So now it's just making sure that teachers are supported in using these tools effectively. Understanding, universal design learning. So this is a lot of theory in terms of lesson planning and making sure that you have the end in mind and you're starting with the standards in mind and then kind of planning backwards instead of saying something like, oh, I want to do this fun activity. Let me see how it fits into the standards. You should be looking at your planning from the opposite way. So we want to do some work in making sure our entire staff understands this mindset because that will help strengthen our programming. Again, there's our assessment platforms. And then something we had talked about too that relates to this is student involvement in conferences and really getting them involved in their learning and being able to speak to their learning to not only their students, their teachers, but their family members as well.
I think this is really important for you to understand the takeaway as what Jen is speaking about, looking at these tiers and giving kids what they need and looking at framework, holding teachers accountable to what they're teaching, when they're teaching it is really important. We've always been a discovery learning school and allowed teachers to have autonomy to do the things that they need to do. But with these gaps, we need to make sure that their time is structured and we utilize their minutes as much as possible. So one of those interventions that Jen's speaking of, we implemented this year and kids are making tremendous gains with it. So, really making sure we use those research-based programs and making sure that teachers are doing it's working. And so we need to continue to make sure that we really support the teachers in that activity. So I just want to make sure you hear that point because it really is making a difference. We are going to talk about people in a minute, but I want you to understand that a lot of the school districts are going to be very specific on these slides about we're going to hire this many people and we're going to hire this many interventions. And we are trying to be very mindful before saying that to you because we think that looking at our end of the year data is the most important thing in hiring what we need. Just having a bunch of people doesn't mean they know what they're doing. They have the information, they have the training, and we don't want to waste this money. And so it's important for us to really analyze what these kids do in the spring to truly understand what they need and then be able to make really informed recommendations to you. So that is why you might not see specific of what we want to do with that because we really want to take a look at that end of the year data.
Agreed. We won't get this money like this ever again. So we want to be smart about it and intentional about how we use it and stretch it as much as possible.
Okay, so Ryan is going to talk to you about supportive learning environments.
Yep. So we touched about what the SEL goals are at last month's board meeting, but just to recap, what we're doing right now is we're using the CASEL SEL framework, and we are doing a self-assessment as a school on where we are as a starting point, as a baseline, and where we want to move forward. So right now we are just building our foundational team. So we talked about drafting a vision statement and priorities. And then by the end of the year, we are hoping to have a action plan moving into next year that's focusing on strengthening adult SEL competencies and capacities. So providing our staff the professional development, collaboration, cultural competence, and staff modeling of SEL. And so what that looks like is outlined on the CASEL rubric, but we'll put out over the summer more specifically what our action plan looks like towards those goals. And then for social emotional supports for staff, really making sure that we're providing our staff resources for self-care, integrating our SEL check-ins, and providing that high quality professional development. When we're looking at social emotional supports for students, when we look at the rubric, it starts with building a foundation which means creating your vision and your team. We then move into strengthening adult SEL capacity, then promoting for students, and then developing a cycle of continuous improvement. So while we're next year focusing on building that staff capacity, we still will be integrating social emotional supports for students and increasing our tiers 2, 3, and 3 intervention supports, as well as focusing on improving what's already existing at the first tier. So we are using survey data. So we have a new platform this year called Panorama that the students for the first time ever did their own social emotional surveys in grades 3 through 12. So we'll utilize that survey data, and we have been utilizing that survey data to identify interventions, look at early warning systems, and implement proactive supports, as well as more advanced level supports. We've branched out and included community-based agencies, Devro, as part of our student assistance program. We are looking at our K through 12 core SEL team, as well as divisional SEL subcommittees to make sure that we are carrying out our action plan, and we are increasing our secondary academic supports. So we started this year with our structured study hall and our after school program. And within that structured study hall, the students that were attending consistently showed significant gains in their overall final grades. So we're looking at continuing that support from the beginning of next year and using part of that Esthers funds to provide that support from the start, because we did take data on it and it was shown to be an effective intervention. And then we are adding a school social worker to engage community-based resources and supports. An area that we found that we needed to hone in on was improving attendance and engagement within school and within the virtual environment. So even though we will be back in school full-time, we anticipate that we will need to work hard to re-engage some of our families, and having that additional support to do things like home visits as needed and support our truancy process is going to be critical. Some considerations that we are looking at right now as we're doing our action planning is just creating an additional staff survey to get feedback on our staff wellness areas in addition to the rubric. And then we're currently also considering, previously we used teacher survey data for students SEL. This year, because we were started in a virtual format, we used student data. So we're deciding and looking at whether we're combining those data sets or just sticking with the student data, or doing a combination of both. So those are our considerations right now.
So healthy system conditions. Jen, you want to get this one?
Sure. And this speaks to a lot of the structures outside of the classroom that help make a school successful and support teachers and staff and students. So each of those bullet points under key actions is like a subcategory under healthy system conditions. So first is stakeholder engagement. So continuing to gather input from a variety of stakeholders through surveys, whether it's academic or social emotional, like Ryan alluded to. I'm really proud of our family engagement workshops that we were able to pull off in the midst of the pandemic. And we've been able to host at least one session a month since last March for our families and for our caregivers on a variety of topics. So we're really excited to be able to expand that for our community. Technology, so to continue offering online course offerings through third-party vendors at the upper grades, expand the options there. Update student and teacher computers. So we did a lot of that already, specifically with ESSER 1 money, correct, Kristen?
Yeah.
Staffing. So this year has been challenging, or actually at the end of last year, during the shutdown is when we typically start interviewing for the upcoming school year. So that was hard to do with everything else going on. So it's been nice for us to be able to explore virtual job fairs. So we attended one about a month ago, and it was a very positive experience for me being a part of it and being able to interview so many people in a short amount of time through a virtual setting. And we even have people coming in for interviews, like formal interviews in the next couple of weeks as a result of that. And it expands our reach, which is really nice outside of the surrounding maybe 10, 20-mile radius. So we're excited to continue to expand that. Scheduling, I know Brian will be speaking to that in terms of scheduling and what that looks like in the coming years through comp planning and strategic planning. And then action planning. So at the administrative level, we've been talking about more of those data-driven conversations within the divisions and with principals where they're setting their own goals and reporting out on those goals on a quarterly basis. Some things to consider in the future in terms of healthy system conditions is to continue to strengthen our two-way communication plan and get as many stakeholder voices involved as possible. Embedding more technology support to our induction plan. So our induction plan is what we follow for our new hires, our instructional staff. And in the past year specifically, we've almost doubled the amount of technology from a hardware and software perspective. So we need to make sure that our new hires coming in feel fully supported in how to utilize these resources. We're going to look creatively at the roles of long-term sub and building subs in the future. So that kind of speaks to what Kristen was talking about. We don't just want to hire people to hire people, but if there's a need for them, let's look at who we have in-house first and who knows our system, who knows our programming, who knows our culture to help support us in those areas with students that we may need support in, and then look to, possibly contract people outside of our school community.
I do think it's important for the board to understand the reality right now on staffing. I mean, it is a problem throughout the county. And now you have people adding on in Esthers money, sometimes 14, 15 support people that they're contracting with contractors through. And there's only so many people to go around in these counties. So adding people is not necessarily the solution, and not necessarily something we can even find that are the people that will actually do the job and do the job right. So that is also a worry for us, that we will be able to find the people that fit the roles that we're looking for to support the kids in this need of learning loss or accelerated learning. So I think that's really important for the board to recognize as we go forward and look at some of this funding.
Yep. And then just on the professional development end side of our staff, we always get feedback on our professional development sessions, but I think we can do a better job of strengthening that piece of it and ensuring that the feedback we're getting from staff, we can use and analyze that data and feedback a little bit better to plan for future programming. Because just like the teachers want to know if what they're doing is effective and making a difference, we need to know if what we're providing to staff is also doing the same.
Okay.
Yep. And then the last one's a system of scaffolded supports. So this speaks more to the programming within our multi-tiered system of support, which is MTSS, where we have our tier 1, 2, and 3 programming. So again, I'm really proud of our strong MTSS framework that we've built over the past few years. We're going to allocate more of our Title I funding to our K-3 division, or our Kimblesville site. In the past, it's been split between multiple buildings, but we feel it's so important that we build those strong foundations and supports at the lower grades, so it minimizes the amount of support that kids need as they get older, and which can be more challenging. So more funding, will be filtered into those K-3 divisions from a Title I perspective. In terms of instruction, continuing to prioritize our standards with the help of PDE. The program Kristen was kind of talking about earlier was Spring Math. This was a new program we brought in this year. And it's been amazing because you hear so much negativity around learning the past year. And we brought this program in, and we have kids that were exiting nonstop from interventions who were needing a lot of support, right? And we put this program in place, and kids are moving out. And we're like, yeah, it's working. That's what you want to happen, right?
I'll give you an example. What I love about this too is that kids are invested in their data. So I was on the baseball field. Of those that know me, I'm on a baseball field a lot. And one of the kids said to the dad in front of me who goes to school, I made 150% gain in my testing. And I was like, that's amazing. And then I looked at it and it's spring math and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so great. That's what the teacher was using. So, so the kids that are even in the elementary school are talking about the gains that they're making. And that's what we want. We want them invested in their learning and making sure that they see the gain. It gives them the confidence. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, it's been really exciting to watch for sure. Again, aligning interventions to student needs. So the more data and information we have on kids, the more we can drill down to the smallest skill deficit and be able to target the types of interventions we're giving to kids, which means we can remove them from interventions, hopefully in a short amount of time, and get them back into the classroom and close any sort of gaps that may have.
And I do think it's
been had.
I do think it's important, Jen, to tell the board, as we're looking at the data, we are identifying kids in more tier 3, tier 2 interventions. So it's not like this has been status quo and kids are making gains and we're all good.
Right.
We are definitely identifying more kids in tier 2 and 3 because of where we've been. So I think it's important for the board to recognize that that number has increased tremendously.
For sure. Yeah. And it's a shame, right? When we got like into the swing of things, right? We had to go and start testing, PSSA, keystones, that sort of thing. And now we're going to break for the summer, and then that summer slide is real, right? So that's going to kind of give us a little step back, and then we're going to have to start again in the fall. So absolutely. Again, some things we already talked about, addressing some of the significant learning and behavioral needs. So we've got tutoring opportunities. These are things that have already started or about to start for the summer. We've got our summer academy, enrolling students in credit recovery, increased behavioral mental health supports through the Chester County Intermediate Unit, and increased psychology support as well, because this has been a big challenge this year, specifically just the mental health aspect of our students, and facing some real challenges that we may not have faced before. So it's important to have those supports prior to the start of next year. And then things to think about in the upcoming school year is the Summer Learning Summit through our Equity Action Team, looking more at class-wide interventions, and spring math kind of speaks to that a little bit. Considering additional staff members to support certain areas. So if there's a certain grade that we're seeing has a really high need and maybe has a large number of kids needing tier 3, really intense interventions, maybe we do need to bring someone in or look at our staff differently and target that particular grade or content area to close some of those gaps. After school programming, supplies and materials. I was glad that we were able to give our kids so many supplies and materials throughout the pandemic, and they've been able to use it at home that they wouldn't necessarily have, like math manipulatives, and things like that. But we're also not getting them back either. So there's a lot of money that's going to be put towards, replenishing those materials for our staff and kids to use. And then looking at our English language learner subgroup. And improving their not just language acquisition, but their growth and achievement progress. And we'll talk more about that in comp planning as well in the future.
So I think what's important, now you know the buckets, you know how we're going to accelerate our learning. So this is a recap of the money that we already had. Okay. So Esthers 1 CARES money was $156,000. And then remember, the Chester County Commissioners CARES money gave us $190,000. So what did we do with that money? Being that when the pandemic was really at its height and we're trying to get kids back in school, we ended up using a lot of that money for health and safety, window replacement to help with the ventilation, health and safety equipment. The cleaning was huge. So we upped that cleaning, and that contract almost tripled. So that was huge. And then we had the bipolarization units. Now they really moved into Esthers 2 because we had that and the teacher computer software. We got all the teachers new Apple computers to align with Zoom and everything else, and Gaggle and software. So with all of that, that really ate up that $347,000, which are both of those two things combined. So then you move on to this $1 million for Esthers 2. And these are the things that you'll see tonight when Donna does a presentation on the board, on the budget, or if you looked at Donna's budget. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to start categorizing some of these things in those buckets, because part of the Esthers fund is that we do the documentation on how we use that money, right? So we have to be very clear about where that bucket is and what we're doing for kids. So the summer credit recovery, that's for the kids that are failing in the high school. We're going to need support staff. We've budgeted that in this budget, this upcoming budget. It's going to, you'll see in the notes, align to system and scaffolding supports. We committed to the summer learning program. Now there's 89,000 budgeted. It could be that not that many kids show up. They say they're coming, but it could be that we don't need as much money as 89,000. And so what happens when we don't use that money? That money just gets put back in the Esthers pot. And then we see what that bottom line is, and we keep planning and using it accordingly. Summer book club, we have the social worker, the equity action team summit, we have 4 contracted tutors right now that we're looking at for the upper school. We have the Performance Matters school data system, the Exact Path. These are all data systems that we're currently using. Panorama, that, all the survey stuff that Ryan's talking about, these are all systems. Now, ventilations and repairs. This is the big conversation we have ventilation projects that have to be repaired, right? And so when we looked at that and the facilities team budgeted that, especially if you start adding air conditioning, that can get into the well over $3 million range, and we can let all ventilation projects eat up the Esthers money. That can happen. But now we also are looking at all these other priorities, and to throw all of that money into air conditioning and ventilation does not seem right. So what we are looking to do, it's not that they don't need to be replaced, because they do. They need to be replaced. But we're looking to do it in stages. So currently there's repairs that need to happen that's been budgeting this summer. And then we have this project that we want to see what the drawing and the bid package looks like, so that we can say, okay, here's how some of this money shook out. Here's what we have left. We're able to do this much of it this year or next summer, and then use our general fund to do the rest of it. Because Esthers will cover some of this conversation around air quality and facility upgrades, but we're not looking to do all of it with Esthers money. So that's part of the conversation that we are going to talk a little further in a minute. We have the classroom window replacement that the ventilation talk has covered, and that is budgeted. Psychological services and supplies, intervention supplies. And now you have Esthers 3, which is the $2 million. And we're talking about some of the things you heard tonight, like ELL programming, intervention supplies. And after we do the data analysis at the end of the year, like Jen said, she might say, I really need another 3rd grade interventionist. And that would mean that would take money away from this bucket here. So with all that in mind, part of the conversation has been, we definitely want to do some ventilation stuff with the ventilation replacement, but we want to look at what is the stages. So Donna, do you want to talk a little bit about your attached proposal?
For the ventilation project?
Yep.
Okay, so as you all know, we've been working on the ventilation unit replacement project for State Road, really assessing the units, trying to get a feel for what needs to be done and what that plan is moving forward. So with that being said, we've determined that we do need to do replacements for the ventilation units at State Road for all of the units, 1955 and 1928 specifically. We've determined that we can scope the job to phase this approach similar to what we did with the windows and the gang bathrooms at State Road. But in order to get a real sense of what those cost estimates are and what that phasing would look like, we would need to work with Heckendorn Shiles and Hirsch and Schilling, the electrical engineer, to determine electrical and mechanical engineer, to work towards the documentation of this project that's been ongoing for the last 6 months, so that we could build those estimates and see where this project can be phased over the next several years. So I did receive a proposal from Heckendorn Shiles a couple of weeks ago with regard to this, but we were already, we'd already had the school-wide facility planning meeting looking at what the strategic planning committee had been working on. So we kind of held it so that we had the opportunity to talk with Kristen, get a better idea from Matt Heckendorn and Jared Bookhammer, what our options were, what we were looking to do with the school-wide facility plan, and so on. So it was determined that in order for us to move to the next phase, or to determine how the school will work on this project, whether it be all in one or a phased approach over several years, we would need to go to that document phase, where we would be scoping the entire job. We would be getting all the specifications and drawings as needed for the mechanical units, for the ventilators, and basically putting this package together that could, whatever time the board was ready to move forward, could go to bid. How we would handle the phasing of it would be, we would place those as alternates. We would have a base bid, which would focus on one floor, just say the 1955 ventilation units, and then the other ventilation units would be alternates. So depending on what those costs for the public bid, what they came in at, we could determine which ventilation, the base, whether we're just going with the base bid or whether we're going to be adding on any of the alternates. So again, it gives the board and administration the ability to better understand the costs, how this can be broken into several phases, and just get us ready so that when the time is right, we will be able to go to bid for this project. So with that being said, the proposal that I did receive from Heckendorn Childs, which includes the full scope of service, all the documentation, the schematics, and the public bid documents, it would be the services of Heckendorn Childs, Schilling and Hurst. It would also require some additional roof engineers for structural professional services and some additional mechanical services. Total proposal came in at $103,200. And this would position AGCS to, one, better understand what the cost for the entire ventilation unit project, as well as what those options are for phasing it. And the board can place this on hold, and when we're ready to go and we know what our funding is and where we'll be drawing that funding from, we would be able to go to a public bid. Does anyone have any questions on that? I know that was a lot.
So we can talk about the list. We can talk about the bid as far as what that ventilation bid is. I mean, that really is just for the drawing so that we can it has to get done. That's the bottom line. The ventilations have to be replaced. We can negotiate where it comes from or how much of we do based on what the Esthers fund needs are. But we just gave you a lot of information as far as here's all the money we've gotten, here's where our needs are. And as a board with all of this money, you're really the governing body that will help us prioritize this list and what you think we should spend the Esthers money on. So do you have questions specifically about the whole thing, about the proposal that Donna will be asking you to approve for ventilation, and then about what our specific needs are based on this accelerated learning plan goal?
Actually, I do, Kristen. If you, back when the school was very, very young, we had gotten some grant money, and we had not spent the grant money on the anticipation of what we had to allocate it to, and we ended up having to pay back. I
heard all about it, Eugene.
And I just want to make sure that we are in compliance with the ESSR.
We have been in more compliance than we've ever been in our whole lives, but I think that this is a good step in the right direction as far as being very transparent about what the state is saying to us about that money, about how we're allowed to spend it, and then what our priorities are. So this is going to be an ever evolving conversation. Now, that's not to say that the state will come back. This isn't one of those grants that you're writing and it's saying you have to do specifically what we're saying. It's saying, here's what you're allowed to spend the money on. But they might come back and say, hey, we let you spend the money on this, but we're no longer allowing you to do that. So you're going to have to repurpose that expense somewhere else. So they're constantly checking in on this. and having trainings and direction. I'm not saying it was years of thoughtful response. This has been a very reactive thing from the state, and the guidance is ever changing. But I think we're doing a really good job as far as being transparent with the state and obviously with you. We have to be in our documentation. Schools don't really have a choice. Does that help?
It does. It just looks, when I look at the allocations and we're putting $1.1 million through the ventilation program, I just want to make sure that we've got that locked down correctly.
I agree. And that's why today we're not asking you for the 1.1. We're only asking you for the drawing so that when we get that, what that project looks like, we can be very specific about, okay, we have enough money, or the Esthers grant will cover this for the ventilation and so forth. So we'll make sure that we're very direct about what Esthers can cover of that project once we get that drawing.
Kristen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jean, this may help with regard to equipment replacement or any items that are incorporated into existing equipment that extends the asset life. We're required to submit that project to the federal government or e-grants for prior approval. So again, anything that we do, we have to work with e-grants, and if there's an issue or a question, we're going to know from the get-go. And right now, the professional services with regard to the air quality and airflow in the rooms is a problem, and that we are currently allowed to utilize the ESSERS 2 or ESSERS 3 monies to remediate that. So we're good right now. What would happen in October or November after kids get back, test scores are made available? I don't know, but at this point, we're doing the reporting quarterly. We have to provide a narrative with it, as well as pictures with an explanation, and it's submitted. If there's any issue through e-grants, they tell you immediately whether or not it's allowed or disallowed. So this is not something where you would submit it and you'd have to wait years for the monitoring. This is quarterly real-time submission.
Eugene, Jen Weaver went to a training and she told me this today, and I couldn't believe this, but they said if you spent the money on computers and a kid lost the computer, that it was used federal money, that you should call the police because they stole federal money. Like, that's how specific they're being in some of the feedback that they're giving us, which is really
police report, because
people were shocked.
It's federal money. Yeah. Yeah.
Create a liability that affects our bond rating and everything else in the future. That's my only concern.
I get that. Yep. I think they all learned from that mistake.
Any other questions or comments? Perfect. All right. You want to go on to your organizational chart?
Yep. So not much has changed here. I just wanted to point out a few things that could be different in this year's budget. So there's the assistant business manager that would fall underneath Donna. So that is an addition there, over on the side of financial chief officer. And then we had special education and student services look a variety of ways in the years that I've been here. And currently right now, the Avon Grove Charter School has never been so lucky with Ryan Taylor and Caitlin Leonard. Both of them are very competent in their areas. And because the emotional student services department is such a need, and SEL is such a need in our school, that we directed it in two. So Ryan is specifically the director of student services, and Caitlin Leonard is special education. So all things special education fall under Caitlin, and all things student services fall under Ryan. Now, we did talk about an overarching person that would help Ryan and Jen, which a lot of districts have. We are not able to find the right person, but we do have a contract with the IU that's supporting Ryan and Caitlin in that initiative. So that is on the budget as a CCIU support. So when the two of them are extended too much, they go to the person from the IU to support them in all things special ed and all things student services. So that is in the budget currently, and that's how that department falls. Other than that, everything else is the same. We did change the role of Kim Tremmel as assessment curriculum coordinator. She was just completely labeled as data, but she's doing a lot of the curriculum writing and curriculum work that Jen is working on. So that position will fall in line with the principals and give a lot of guidance to the principals regarding curriculum writing and data. So those are the changes. Is there any questions about that specifically?
Nope.
Okay.
Moving along, Donna, policies that you're going to present for us to review for June 15th and the ones you want to rescind.
Okay. I have two policies this evening. One, unfortunately, is very long. We have the update for the federal compliance, which is driven by the uniform guidelines at the federal level. So the policy just incorporates some of the new ESSER guidelines that were developed over the recent months. And there are several attachments with the federal compliance policy. And the second policy that's been provided is the internal controls policy. That has been written, but we were waiting on the federal compliance because the two of them are connected. Upon approval in 30 days, we will be recommending the rescinding of the AGCS petty cash policy that was written years ago that has now been incorporated into the internal controls policy. So the policies are on board docs and ready and waiting for the board to review. Any questions or concerns, please email me directly. We can further discuss at the June meeting, and then administration will be requesting approval at the board session on June 15th. And that's it.
Cool. Anything else from Kristen or anybody else?
Nope.
So the only thing I wanted to comment on, and I want everyone to think about on the board, is I've got multiple comments from other board members that our meetings are intense and they go a lot longer. So one of the things I want to think about is, especially for committee meeting minutes, if we can produce those, send them out ahead of time so that we can review them, maybe spend less time going over them. And then I'm going to work with Kristen and see if there's a way we can better strategize and streamline the meetings so that they are a little less long, because some of these go very late into the evening. So just give that some thought, and any of your feedback, especially like Rob and Kristen, as you're going off the board, any thoughts from your previous experience, Eugene, you too, everybody, because we want to make sure that these are well attended and well executed, and we're not all fading off towards the end of the evening. Think about that. But for now, I'm asking you to produce your meeting minutes ahead of time, send them out to everyone, or put them in board docs, and so that we can all review them and maybe spend a little less time on those and move forward to the meetings. Any questions or comments on that? No. All right, so that would be the end of the working session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Rob motions to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second Stacy Barno.
All in favor, just give me a big nod. All right, or Regine, a big wave. All right, we'll see everyone.